The iron taste of blood lingered on Katherine Davis's lips as she stared at the wanted poster outside the sheriff's office in Yreka, California. It wasn't her own face on the yellowed paper, but that of the man who'd left her with more than just memories. 1873 had been a cruel year to her, and as the autumn wind whipped through the mining town's dusty streets, she pulled her shawl tighter to hide the scars that traced her neck and disappeared beneath her high-collared dress. "They won't find him," a gruff voice said behind her. "Not in these parts, anyhow." Katherine turned, her guard instantly raised. The stranger wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, his cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. The badge pinned to his chest caught the late afternoon sunlight. "Deputy," she acknowledged with a nod, careful not to turn her face fully toward him. "Deputy Benjamin Lawson," he corrected, extending a calloused hand. When she hesitated, he dropped it to his side without comment. "You're new to Yreka." It wasn't a question. In a town of barely 2,000 souls, strangers stood out like wildflowers in snow. "Passing through," Katherine lied, knowing full well she had nowhere else to go. The stagecoach had brought her as far as her meager savings would allow. The deputy's gaze lingered on the edge of a scar visible just above her collar. She stiffened, turning away. Miss Davis," she replied tersely. "Katherine Davis." "Well, Miss Davis, if you're looking for work, Widow Murphy at the boarding house could use help. Or the Silver Dollar Saloon, though I wouldn't recommend—" "I'm a seamstress," she interrupted, her tone sharper than intended. The idea of working in a saloon made her stomach turn. "I can mend, alter, create, my hands work just fine." Something in Deputy Lawson's expression softened. "Didn't mean to offend. We need a good seamstress in town. Last one packed up for San Francisco last spring." Katherine nodded, already regretting her curtness. Work was what she needed, honest work that would keep her fed and housed until she figured out what came next. "The general store has a room upstairs they sometimes rent out," he offered. "Owner's name is Hiram Jenkins. Tell him Ben sent you." "Thank you," she managed, surprised by his kindness. As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Miss Davis, whatever story those scars tell, it's over now. Yreka might be rough around the edges, but folks here mind their business." Katherine didn't reply. She'd heard similar promises before, and they all turned out to be lies. But she needed shelter for the night, and the daylight was fading fast. The general store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and tobacco. A brass bell jangled as she entered, drawing the attention of a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Help you, madam?" he asked, setting aside a ledger. "Mr. Jenkins. Deputy Lawson said you might have a room to let." The storekeeper studied her for a moment before nodding. $2 a week, paid in advance. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean." Katherine reached into her reticule and counted out the coins, leaving her with barely enough for food. "I'm a seamstress," she said as she placed the money on the counter. "If you know anyone needing work done." Jenkins's eyes brightened. "Now that's providential. My wife's been complaining about the lack of a decent seamstress since Martha left. She's hosting the Founders' Day social next month and needs a new dress." For the first time in months, Katherine felt a flicker of hope. "I can help with that. Rooms upstairs, last door on the right. There's a washroom at the end of the hall. My wife Abigail will be by in the morning to talk about that dress." He handed her a key. "Welcome to Yreka, Miss Davis, Katherine Davis." As she climbed the narrow stairs to her new accommodations, Katherine allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this remote mining town might provide what she had been searching for. Anonymity, work, and a chance to disappear from the man who had promised to find her, no matter how far she ran. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small table beneath the window that overlooked the main street. Katherine set down her carpetbag and sank onto the bed, her body aching from days of travel. She unbuttoned her high-collared dress with trembling fingers, letting the fabric fall away to reveal what she hid from the world. The scars began at her jaw and traveled down her neck, across her collarbone, and along her right shoulder and arm raised, angry lines that told the story of a night she couldn't forget, no matter how hard she tried. Katherine touched them gently, the way she always did when alone, tracing each one as if reading a map of her survival. Then she wept, silently, as the last light of day faded into darkness. Morning arrived with the sound of wagons and the distant whistle of a train. Katherine had slept fitfully, plagued by the same nightmares that had followed her for months. She dressed carefully in one of her 2 remaining dresses, buttoning the collar high and securing her hair in a simple bun that covered the scar behind her right ear. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find a plump, cheerful woman with gray-streaked brown hair. "Miss Davis, I'm Abigail Jenkins. Hiram told me you're a seamstress." Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "You've arrived just in time. The Founders' Day social is in 4 weeks, and I've been in absolute despair over my gown." Katherine smiled politely. "I'd be happy to help, Mrs. Jenkins." "Wonderful. Come down for breakfast and we can discuss what I have in mind." Over plates of eggs and biscuits in the Jenkins's kitchen behind the store, Abigail laid out fashion plates from a Godey's Ladies book that was several months old. Something like this, perhaps. She pointed to an elegant evening gown with a modest bustle. "In burgundy silk. I ordered the fabric from San Francisco months ago, but without Martha." She sighed. "My fingers are too arthritic for fine work these days." Katherine examined the design. "It's lovely. I can certainly make this for you." "Excellent. And I've already told Judith Parker about you. She's the banker's wife. She'll want to meet you straight away." "Oh, and Clara Bennett mentioned needing her wedding dress altered, her sister's, you know, but it's too large in the bodice." By the time breakfast ended, Katherine had a list of potential clients and the promise of enough work to see her through winter. For the first time in a long while, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. As she helped clear the breakfast dishes, a commotion outside drew their attention. Horses' hooves thundered down the street, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Hiram rushed into the kitchen. "Stay inside," he ordered, grabbing a shotgun from above the doorway. "Trouble at the bank." Katherine's heart raced as she moved away from the windows, her old fears surging back. Had he found her already? Was this how it would end? Mrs. Jenkins tutted nervously. "Probably those Delaney brothers again. They've been causing trouble all through Siskiyou County." More gunshots rang out closer now. Through the window, Katherine glimpsed men on horseback galloping past, bandanas covering their faces. Behind them rode Deputy Lawson and several other men, guns drawn. "The sheriff's been after them for months," Mrs. Jenkins explained, wringing her hands. Bold as brass, robbing in broad daylight, they waited in tense silence until Hiram returned nearly an hour later, his expression grim. "They got away with the payroll for the mine," he reported. "Shot Tommy Barrett, he's the teller. Doc's with him now." He looked at Katherine. "Town's going to be busy with this for a while. Might want to stay inside today." Katherine nodded, relieved it wasn't what she had feared, but unsettled nonetheless. Violence seemed to follow her, no matter how far she ran. That afternoon, she set up a small workstation in her room, using the table beneath the window. Mrs. Jenkins had provided her with scissors, needles, and other basic supplies, promising that more customers would bring their own materials. As dusk fell, another knock came at her door. Katherine opened it cautiously to find Deputy Lawson, his hat in his hands and a troubled look on his face. "Miss Davis," he said, his voice low. "May I have a word?" Her throat tightened with apprehension. "Is something wrong?" "Not exactly." He glanced down the hallway. "It's about the men who robbed the bank today. One of them dropped something during the chase." From his pocket, he withdrew a folded paper. A wanted poster. Not for them, but for someone else. With trembling fingers, Katherine took the paper and unfolded it. Her own face stared back at her, an older sketch, from before the scars, but recognizable nonetheless. Above the image were the words, "Wanted for questioning, Katherine Davis, in connection with the murder of Judge William Hargrove in Sacramento, California." The room seemed to spin around her. "I didn't," she began, then stopped herself. Deputy Lawson's expression remained unreadable. "I'm not here to arrest you, Miss Davis, but I need to know if trouble's following you to my town." Katherine sank into the chair by her table, the wanted poster clutched in her hand. "It wasn't murder," she whispered. "It was self-defense." Benjamin Lawson closed the door behind him and took a seat on the edge of her bed, his elbows resting on his knees. "I'm listening." For a moment, Katherine considered lying. She had become good at it over the past months. But something in the deputy's steady gaze made her reconsider. "Judge Hargrove was my employer in Sacramento," she began, her voice barely audible. "I was his housekeeper after my parents died. He was respected in the community, a widower. No one knew what he was like behind closed doors." Ben's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "He became interested in me. I rejected his advances. He didn't take it well." Katherine's hand unconsciously moved to her collar. "One night he had been drinking heavily. He cornered me in the kitchen with a knife, said if I wouldn't give him what he wanted willingly, he'd take it and make sure no other man would look at me again." She unbuttoned the top of her collar, revealing the beginning of the scars. "He started here. Said he'd carve his initials into me so I'd always remember who I belonged to." Ben's eyes darkened with anger, but his voice remained calm. "What happened next?" I fought back. "The knife. There was a struggle. He fell on it." Katherine closed her eyes, remembering the look of shock on the judge's face as the blade sank into his chest. "I ran. His brother is the district attorney. No one would believe my story over the word of the Hargrove family. And the men who robbed the bank today," Katherine shook her head. "I've never seen them before. But the judge's brother hired bounty hunters. $500 for my return to Sacramento, alive." Benjamin stood and paced the small room. "The Delaney brothers aren't bounty hunters, they're common thieves. But they might recognize the opportunity if they see this poster." He took the paper from her trembling hand and tucked it back into his pocket. "No one else needs to see this." "You believe me?" Katherine asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "I've been a lawman long enough to know that legal doesn't always mean just." He paused. "Stay in town, keep working. I'll make some inquiries discreetly. There might be a way to clear your name without putting you in danger." "Why would you help me?" Ben's expression softened slightly. "Because every scar tells a story of survival, Miss Davis. And yours tells me you're a fighter, not a cold-blooded killer." With that, he placed his hat back on his head and left, leaving Katherine to wonder if she had found an ally or simply delayed the inevitable reckoning that awaited her. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Katherine established herself as Yreka's new seamstress. Word spread quickly about her skill with a needle, and soon she had more work than she could handle. Mrs. Jenkins's burgundy silk gown progressed beautifully, as did half a dozen other projects for the town's leading ladies. Katherine rented a small space off the general store for her business, hanging a modest sign that read K. Davis, Seamstress and Alterations. For the first time since fleeing Sacramento, she began to feel a sense of purpose and belonging. But beneath this newfound stability lurked constant vigilance. Each time the shop door opened, her heart skipped a beat. Every stranger passing through town sent a chill down her spine. She took to wearing her hair down on one side to better conceal the scars that climbed her neck, though the high collars of her dresses hid the worst of them. Deputy Lawson stopped by her shop regularly, ostensibly to check on her well-being, but Katherine suspected he was also keeping watch. Their conversations remained formal but gradually warmed as days turned into weeks. One evening, as she was closing up shop, Ben appeared in the doorway, his expression more serious than usual. "Miss Davis, I'd like to escort you to dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening," he said, the formality of his tone betraying his nervousness. Katherine glanced up from her ledger, surprised by the invitation. "Deputy, please," he interrupted. "I have some information you might want to hear. And it's Ben, not Deputy, at least when I'm not wearing the badge." Curiosity overcame her hesitation. "Very well, Ben." The Grand Hotel's restaurant was the finest establishment in Yreka, with white tablecloths and actual silverware instead of the tin utensils used in most eateries. A few curious glances followed them as they were seated, but Katherine had grown somewhat accustomed to the town's interest in her as the new seamstress. After they ordered, Ben leaned forward slightly. "I've been corresponding with a friend who works for the Sacramento Bee," he said quietly. "Asked him to look into Judge Hargrove's death without mentioning your name." Katherine's fingers tightened around her water glass. "And there are whispers that you weren't the first young woman in the judge's household to suffer mistreatment. His previous housekeeper left town suddenly 2 years ago. No one knows where she went." "Martha Collier," Katherine whispered. "She warned me before she left, but I didn't understand at the time. I needed the position too badly to heed her warnings." Ben nodded grimly. "My friend also discovered that the judge's personal physician had treated him for episodes of violent temper after a head injury some years back. The physician was paid handsomely for his discretion." A flicker of hope kindled in Katherine's chest. "Does this help my case?" "It might. The district attorney, the judge's brother, has powerful friends, but he's not invincible. Evidence of the judge's pattern of behavior could support your claim of self-defense." Ben hesitated. "But there's something else. A bounty hunter named Silas Grady has been asking questions about you in towns along the stage routes heading north from Sacramento." The name sent ice through Katherine's veins. "Grady, you know him, by reputation." She swallowed hard. "He's known for bringing back bounties dead rather than alive if they give him trouble." Their food arrived, momentarily halting their conversation. Katherine had no appetite now, but forced herself to take small bites to avoid drawing attention. "I won't let him take you," Ben said quietly once the waiter had gone. "But we need to be prepared. Yreka is remote, but it's still on the main route to Oregon. It's only a matter of time before he passes through." "I should leave," Katherine said, setting down her fork. "I've brought danger to your town." "Running won't solve this," Ben countered, his blue eyes holding hers steadily. "You'll spend your whole life looking over your shoulder. We need to clear your name." "We," the word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond this immediate problem. Ben's expression softened, and for a moment, his professional demeanor gave way to something more vulnerable. "I believe in justice, Katherine. Real justice, not just what's written in law books. And he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've come to care about what happens to you." Katherine looked away, unable to bear the sincerity in his gaze. No man had looked at her that way since the scars. Certainly none had seen the full extent of her disfigurement and still spoken of caring. "You don't know what you're saying," she murmured. "You haven't seen." The scars. Ben finished for her. They don't change who you are. A bitter laugh escaped her. They changed everything. The way people look at me, the way I look at myself. Then perhaps it's time to see yourself through different eyes. Ben reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. Every scar tells a story of survival, Katherine. Yours tell me you faced something terrible and lived to walk away. There's beauty in that kind of strength. Before she could respond, the restaurant door burst open and Sheriff Harrison strode in, his face grim. He made straight for their table. "Ben," he said without preamble, "Delaney brothers have been spotted at the old Miller place just outside town. Posse is forming now." Ben stood immediately, duty overriding all else. "How many?" "At least 4, maybe more. They've got hostages, Miller family." Katherine watched the transformation as Ben shifted from the man who had just spoken such tender words to the deputy lawman, his jaw set with determination. "I have to go," he said to her. "Stay at the Jenkins place tonight. Don't go back to your room alone." "Be careful," she whispered, fear gripping her heart for reasons that had nothing to do with her own situation. He nodded once before following the sheriff out. Through the window, Katherine watched as men gathered in the street, checking firearms and mounting horses. The possibility that Ben might not return hit her with unexpected force. It was in that moment she realized that, despite her best efforts to keep everyone at a distance, Benjamin Lawson had somehow slipped past her defenses. Dawn broke over Yreka with no word from the posse. Katherine had barely slept, alternating between worry for Ben and fear that Silas Grady might appear in his absence. Mrs. Jenkins had been kind enough to offer her the spare bedroom for the night, making no mention of the unusual circumstances or Katherine's obvious distress. As Katherine helped prepare breakfast, hoofbeats sounded outside. She rushed to the window to see riders entering town, the returning posse. Her eyes searched frantically until she spotted Ben, his shirt bloodied but sitting upright in his saddle. Relief flooded through her, so intense she had to grip the windowsill for support. "They're back," she told Mrs. Jenkins, her voice unsteady. "And not a moment too soon," the older woman replied. "Mr. Jenkins said there's a stranger been asking questions at the saloon since last night. Described him as mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous." Katherine's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "About a young woman with scars traveling alone." Mrs. Jenkins gave her a knowing look. "Hiram didn't say anything, of course. Neither did most folks. We take care of our own in Yreka, our own." The words brought an unexpected lump to Katherine's throat. Somehow, in the short time she'd been here, she'd become one of them, someone worth protecting. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now, don't you worry. That deputy of ours seems quite taken with you. He won't let any harm come your way." Katherine busied herself with setting the table to hide her flushing cheeks. "He's just doing his job." "Hum," Mrs. Jenkins hummed knowingly. "And I suppose that's why he stops by your shop nearly every day, even when there's no trouble to report." Before Katherine could formulate a response, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Jenkins answered it, and a moment later Ben entered the kitchen, his left arm bandaged and held in a makeshift sling. "You're hurt," Katherine blurted, rising from her chair. "Bullet grazed me." "Nothing serious," he assured her, though the lines of pain around his eyes told a different story. "Mrs. Jenkins, Mr. Jenkins, would you mind if I speak with Miss Davis alone for a moment?" The couple exchanged meaningful glances before excusing themselves. Once they were gone, Ben's professional demeanor dropped, revealing exhaustion and concern. "Silas Grady is in town," he said without preamble. "Arrived last night while we were dealing with the Delaneys." Katherine sank back into her chair. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned a stranger asking questions. "He's staying at the hotel. Claims he's just passing through on business, but he's been showing your wanted poster around. Ben moved closer, lowering his voice. Katherine, I need to get you somewhere safe until I can sort this out. Where? She asked, despair creeping into her voice. If I run, it only makes me look guilty. Not run hide, just for a few days. He ran his good hand through his hair, clearly struggling with something. I have a cabin about 5 miles outside town. It was my father's. No one knows I still keep it up. Katherine stared at him, understanding the risk he was taking. You'd harbor a fugitive. You could lose your badge or worse. You're not a fugitive. You're a witness to your own defense, Ben corrected firmly. And yes, I will. Why? Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Ben's expression softened, the weariness in his eyes giving way to something warmer. Because in the weeks you've been here, I've seen a woman of uncommon courage and dignity, someone who carries terrible scars yet still finds it in her heart to create beauty for others. He paused. And because I think I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Davis, scars and all. The confession hung in the air between them, as startling as a gunshot in a quiet room. Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes, tears she'd forbidden herself since the night she fled Sacramento. You can't love me, she whispered. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied simply. I know your strength, your kindness, your determination. The rest, the details, the past, those are just pages in your story. I'd like the chance to read them all if you'll let me. A sob escaped her and she pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle it. You haven't seen the worst of the scars. Show me, Ben said gently. If you trust me enough. Katherine hesitated, her hands trembling as they rose to her collar. Slowly, she unbuttoned the high neck of her dress and folded it down, revealing the network of scars that traveled from her jaw down her neck and across her collarbone, disappearing beneath her chemise. Ben's expression remained steady. Though his eyes darkened with anger not at her disfigurement, she realized, but at what had been done to her. Emboldened by his reaction, Katherine turned slightly and pulled back her hair to reveal the deep scar that ran from behind her ear down the back of her neck. He said he'd make sure no man would ever want me again, she whispered, her voice breaking. That I'd be too hideous to look at. Ben stepped forward then, closing the distance between them. With infinite gentleness, he raised his hand and traced the line of a scar along her jaw, his touch feather light. He was wrong, he said, his voice rough with emotion. These scars don't make you hideous, Katherine. They make you a survivor. Every one of them tells the story of your courage, your refusal to surrender. Katherine closed her eyes, overwhelmed by his touch and his words. Will you trust me? Ben asked quietly. Will you let me help you? She opened her eyes to find his face inches from hers, his gaze unwavering in its conviction. Yes, she whispered. Within the hour they had formulated a plan. Katherine would slip out the back of the Jenkins's house and make her way to the livery stable, where Ben had arranged for a horse to be waiting. She would ride to his cabin using a map he'd hastily drawn, while he returned to his duties in town to avoid arousing suspicion. Stay at the cabin, he instructed as they said their goodbyes in the Jenkins's kitchen. There's food and supplies. I'll come as soon as I can tomorrow at the latest. What will you tell people about my absence? That you've gone to deliver Mrs. Jenkins's finished gown to her sister in Hornbrook for the final fitting. It's only 20 miles north, a reasonable journey. He handed her a small revolver. Do you know how to use this? Katherine took the weapon, its weight familiar in her hand. My father taught me before he died. Ben looked relieved. Keep it with you. I don't expect trouble, but better safe than sorry. As she prepared to leave, Katherine impulsively reached out and touched his cheek. Be careful with Grady. Men like him don't hesitate to kill if it serves their purpose. I've dealt with his kind before, Ben assured her, covering her hand with his. "Just focus on staying safe until I come for you." The journey to Ben's cabin took longer than expected. Katherine had to take a circuitous route to avoid being seen leaving town, and the terrain grew increasingly rugged as she followed the crude map into the foothills east of Yreka. By late afternoon, she was beginning to fear she had become lost when she finally spotted the cabin nestled among pine trees on a small rise. It was modest but sturdy looking, with a stone chimney and a small front porch. Katherine dismounted and led her horse to a small lean-to at the side of the cabin that served as a basic stable. After unsaddling the animal and providing water from a nearby stream, she approached the cabin door. Inside was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a small kitchen area. A doorway led to a single bedroom containing a bed with a surprisingly comfortable-looking quilt. Everything was clean and well-maintained, if rustic. Katherine found the promised supplies, canned goods, flour, coffee, and other staples in a cupboard. There was enough firewood stacked beside the hearth to last several days. As she settled in, building a small fire to ward off the evening chill, Katherine found herself wondering about this place and what it meant to Ben. He had mentioned it was his father's cabin, but had shared little else about his past or family. The isolation, which should have frightened her after months of running, instead brought a strange sense of peace. For the first time since that terrible night in Sacramento, she felt truly safe. As darkness fell, Katherine lit a lamp and prepared a simple meal from the supplies. She ate slowly, listening to the night sounds of the forest around the cabin, the hoot of owls, the rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Later, as she lay in Ben's bed, surrounded by the faint scent of him in the sheets, Katherine allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where her past didn't haunt her, where the scars that mapped her body were just marks and not shameful reminders of violation. A life, perhaps, with Benjamin Lawson in it. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had never expected to find someone who could look at her damaged body and see beauty, who could value her strength rather than be repulsed by its physical manifestation. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and deep in the safety of the hidden cabin. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Katherine rose and began her day by fetching fresh water from the stream and building up the fire. As she prepared breakfast, she found herself humming a simple, unconscious act that she realized she hadn't done in months. The day stretched before her with little to occupy her time. She explored the cabin more thoroughly, finding books on a shelf that revealed something of Ben's character, volumes on law, history, and surprisingly, poetry. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she discovered a family Bible with births and deaths recorded in faded ink, the most recent being Thomas Lawson, beloved father, 1870. Only 3 years ago. The loss was still fresh then. By midday, Katherine had cleaned the already neat cabin and prepared a stew for dinner, expecting Ben's arrival. When afternoon faded into evening with no sign of him, she tried not to worry. Town business could have delayed him, or perhaps he was being careful to avoid suspicion. But as full darkness fell, concern gnawed at her. Something felt wrong. She kept the lamp burning in the window until well past midnight before finally retiring to bed, the revolver close at hand. Dawn broke with still no sign of Ben. Katherine paced the cabin, debating her options. If trouble had found him in town, she might be putting him at greater risk by staying hidden. But if he was simply delayed, returning to town could place them both in danger. By mid-morning, her decision was made for her. The sound of approaching horses, multiple riders, Not just one sent her rushing to the window. 3 men on horseback were making their way up the path to the cabin. None of them was Ben. Catherine's heart pounded as she grabbed the revolver and quickly assessed her options. The cabin had only 2 doors front and back, and the windows were too small to serve as escape routes. The forest offered cover, but she'd have to make it there first. She chose the back door, slipping out quietly and making her way toward the tree line. She had nearly reached it when a voice stopped her cold. "That's far enough, Miss Davis." Katherine turned slowly, revolver raised, to find a tall, gaunt man with a weather-beaten face and cold eyes regarding her from 20 paces away. He wore a duster and a flat-brimmed hat, and the badge on his chest wasn't from any sheriff's office she recognized. "Silas Grady, I presume," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "At your service." He touched the brim of his hat in mock politeness. "You've led me quite a chase, Miss Davis. Sacramento to Marysville to Red Bluff to Redding, and finally to this charming little mining town." "Where's Deputy Lawson?" she demanded, the gun unwavering in her grip. "Your gallant protector. Currently enjoying the hospitality of the Yreka jail," Grady replied with a thin smile. "Harboring a fugitive is a serious offense, especially for a lawman." Horror washed over Katherine. "He's innocent. He was just doing his job. By hiding you in his personal property, I think not." Grady took a step closer. "Now we can do this the easy way, or we can do it hard. The district attorney in Sacramento is paying handsomely for your return alive, preferably, but the poster does say dead or alive in the fine print." Katherine cocked the revolver. "Stay back." Grady sighed, as if dealing with a troublesome child. "Miss Davis, I have 2 men behind you with rifles. Even if you manage to shoot me, which I doubt, you won't leave this clearing alive." His voice hardened. "Now drop the gun." Katherine glanced behind her to see that he was telling the truth. 2 men stood at the edge of the trees, both with rifles trained on her. Slowly, she lowered the revolver. "Wise choice," Grady said, approaching to take the weapon from her hand. "I've prepared a horse for you. We leave for Sacramento immediately." "I won't go back there," Katherine stated flatly. "I'll die first." "That can be arranged," Grady replied coldly, "but it would be a waste of $500. He gestured to his men. "Secure her hands, we're losing daylight." As one of the men approached with rope to bind her wrists, Katherine's mind raced. If Ben was in jail, no help would be coming. Her only hope lay in herself, and perhaps in the people of Yreka who had accepted her as one of their own. "The whole town knows what Judge Hargrove did to me," she said as her wrists were bound. "They've seen the scars. They know it was self-defense." Grady shrugged. "The opinions of miners and shopkeepers mean nothing in a court of law. It's the judge's brother who matters, and he wants justice for his murdered kin." "It wasn't murder," Katherine insisted as she was led to a waiting horse. "He attacked me. I defended myself." "Save it for the trial," Grady advised, helping her mount with a rough push. "Though I doubt it will make much difference." As they rode away from the cabin, Katherine took one last look at the place that had briefly represented safety and hope. Whatever happened now, she promised herself she would not go meekly to the gallows for a crime that was no crime at all. And somehow, she would find a way to help Ben, who had risked everything for her. The journey back to Yreka was conducted mostly in silence. Grady rode beside her, vigilant for any attempt to escape, while his 2 companions followed behind. Katherine kept her eyes open for any opportunity, but the bounty hunter was too experienced to offer her one. As they approached the outskirts of town in the late afternoon, Katherine was surprised to see they weren't heading for the sheriff's office or the jail. "Where are we going?" she asked, breaking the long silence. "Train station," Grady replied tersely. "Evening train to Redding leaves in an hour. From there, we'll catch the connection to Sacramento. Without seeing the sheriff, without any legal proceedings, Katherine's voice rose in disbelief. You can't just take me across state lines without proper authorization. Grady's cold smile returned. I have all the authorization I need right here. He patted his pocket where the wanted poster was kept. And $500 waiting says the district attorney will be quite happy with my methods. As they rode down Yreka's main street toward the station, Katherine desperately searched the faces of townspeople they passed. Some she recognized Mrs. Parker from the bank, Mr. Thompson the blacksmith, Clara Bennett, whose wedding dress she had altered. Their expressions showed shock and confusion at seeing her bound and escorted by armed men. "Help!" Katherine called out suddenly. "Please, someone find Sheriff Harrison. This man is taking me illegally." Grady's hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. "Shut your mouth, or you'll make this journey gagged and tied across your saddle." But her cry had the desired effect. People stopped to stare, and whispers spread rapidly. Mr. Thompson stepped into the street, blocking their path. "What's going on here, stranger?" he demanded, his blacksmith's arms crossed over his massive chest. Grady didn't flinch. "Official business. Step aside." "Don't see any official papers," Thompson replied, standing his ground. "And that there is our town seamstress you've got trussed up." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Katherine recognized faces from her weeks of working in the shop: customers, neighbors, people who had welcomed her despite her scars and reticence. "He's taking me to Sacramento on false charges," she called out. "Deputy Lawson knows the truth. Please, someone find him." "Your deputy is in no position to help anyone," Grady snarled, then addressed the growing crowd. "This woman is wanted for the murder of Judge William Hargrove. I have legal authority to return her to Sacramento for trial." He pulled out the wanted poster. $500 reward, dead or alive. Now stand aside." A murmur ran through the crowd. Murder was a serious charge, one that gave even friendly faces pause. "It was self-defense," Katherine pleaded. "The judge attacked me. He gave me these scars." She tugged at her collar, revealing the marks that climbed her neck. "Ask Deputy Lawson. He has proof." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Sheriff Harrison hadn't pushed his way through the crowd at that moment, his expression thunderous. "What in tarnation is going on here, Grady?" he demanded. "I thought I made it clear you weren't to move the prisoner without my say-so." Grady's face tightened. "With all due respect, Sheriff, this is a federal matter. The lady is wanted for murder in Sacramento County, and I have full authority to transport her." "Not from my jail, you don't," Harrison snapped. "And certainly not without proper paperwork, which you have yet to provide." Hope surged through Katherine. "Sheriff, please, Deputy Lawson has evidence that proves my innocence. Judge Hargrove attacked me. I acted in self-defense." Harrison's eyes softened slightly as they met hers. "I know, Miss Davis. Ben explained everything before this bounty hunter threw him in my jail on false charges." He turned back to Grady, his hand moving to rest on his holstered gun. "Now, you're going to untie this lady and accompany me to my office, where we can sort this out properly." For a tense moment, Katherine thought Grady might resist. His hand hovered near his own weapon, and his men shifted restlessly behind them. Then, from the direction of the jail, a familiar voice called out, "I wouldn't try it, Grady." Benjamin Lawson strode toward them, bruised but very much not imprisoned, his gun drawn and aimed squarely at the bounty hunter's chest. Relief flooded through Katherine at the sight of him. "Ben." "Sorry I'm late," he said, his eyes never leaving Grady. "Took me a while to convince the night deputy that Grady had no authority to lock me up." The crowd parted to let Ben through until he stood beside the sheriff, both men now facing down the bounty hunter and his companions. "You're outnumbered, Grady," Harrison stated calmly. "And outgunned, considering half the men in this crowd are probably armed." It was true. Katherine noticed several townsmen had their hands near holstered weapons or resting on concealed firearms. Grady's gaze swept the hostile crowd before returning to the sheriff and deputy. With a curse, he lowered his hand from his gun. "This is obstruction of justice." "No," Ben countered. "This is justice being properly served. Miss Davis deserves a fair hearing, not a midnight train ride to a hanging." Sheriff Harrison nodded to one of the townsmen. "Untie her, Jim." As the ropes were cut from her wrists, Katherine rubbed the raw skin where they had chafed. Ben moved to her side immediately, helping her down from the horse. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. "I am now," she replied, the full impact of her narrow escape beginning to sink in. Harrison gestured to his own deputies, who had arrived on the scene. "Take Mr. Grady and his friends to the office. We need to have a long discussion about jurisdiction and proper legal procedure." As the bounty hunters were led away, the crowd began to disperse, many pausing to offer Katherine words of support or gentle pats on the shoulder. It was overwhelming, this outpouring of protection from people who barely knew her. "They all came out for you," Ben observed, a smile touching his lips. "Seems you've made quite an impression on Yreka." "I don't understand," Katherine said, still stunned by what had transpired. "How did they know to help me?" "Small towns have their own kind of telegraph," Ben replied, guiding her toward the sheriff's office. The moment Grady started asking questions about a scarred seamstress, word spread. And when he locked me up on false charges, people started to put the pieces together. "But the murder charge is being addressed as we speak," Ben assured her. "While you were at the cabin, I received a telegram from my friend at the Sacramento Bee. He found 2 former housekeepers who worked for Judge Hargrove before you and Martha Collier. Both were willing to testify about his inappropriate behavior." Hope, fragile but real, began to bloom in Katherine's heart. Will it be enough? Along with the doctor's records and character testimonies from people who knew him well. "I believe so." Ben's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You may need to return to Sacramento eventually to give your statement, but not as a prisoner, as a witness." As they reached the sheriff's office, Katherine hesitated. "What happens now?" Ben's expression grew serious. "Now we make sure Grady and his men understand they have no authority here. Sheriff Harrison has telegraphed the district attorney in Sacramento requesting official clarification of your status. Until we receive a response, you'll remain under the protection of Yreka law enforcement." "Under arrest?" Katherine asked, her heart sinking. "Under protection," Ben corrected firmly. "There's a difference." His voice softened. "You'll stay at Mrs. Harrison's boarding house. She's the sheriff's sister, and no one will bother you there." It wasn't perfect, but it was far better than being bound for Sacramento in Grady's custody. "Thank you," Katherine whispered. "For everything." Ben's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a fight ahead of us, but we'll face it together if that's what you want." The question in his words was unmistakable. Katherine thought of all she had endured, of the scars that had once seemed to define her future, of the loneliness she had accepted as her fate. "It's what I want," she affirmed, her voice gaining strength with each word. "To face whatever comes next together." The days that followed were tense, but not without hope. Silas Grady and his men were kept under supervision at the local hotel, forbidden from leaving town until the matter was resolved. Katherine continued her work as seamstress, though now with a deputy discreetly stationed nearby for protection. Ben divided his time between his regular duties and building Katherine's defense, corresponding frequently with contacts in Sacramento, and gathering statements from Yreka citizens regarding her character and conduct during her time in town. A week after the confrontation in the street, a telegram arrived from the Sacramento District Attorney's office. Katherine, Ben, and Sheriff Harrison gathered in the sheriff's office as Harrison read it aloud. In light of new evidence regarding the death of Judge William Hargrove, the charge against Katherine Davis is reduced from murder to justifiable homicide in self-defense. Request: Miss Davis travel to Sacramento at earliest convenience to provide formal statement. Escort no longer deemed necessary. Signed, District Attorney Edward Hargrove. Katherine stared in disbelief. The judge's own brother reduced the charge. Edward Hargrove is a politician above all else, Ben explained. With multiple witnesses coming forward about his brother's behavior and the medical records showing a history of violence, pursuing a murder charge would only damage his reputation. This way, he saves face while allowing justice to be served. So I'm free. The word felt foreign on Katherine's tongue after so many months of fear. Sheriff Harrison nodded, folding the telegram. Free to go to Sacramento and clear your name officially, yes. I suggest you do so promptly, before anyone has a chance to change their mind. I'll accompany you, Ben offered immediately. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Taking time off, Deputy? Personal leave, sir. Ben's gaze never left Katherine's face. If that's acceptable. Been due for a vacation for 3 years now, Harrison agreed with a knowing smile. I think Yreka can survive without you for a week or two. That evening, Katherine sat on the porch of Mrs. Harrison's boarding house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders for so long had begun to lift, though she knew the journey wasn't over yet. The sound of boots on the wooden steps announced Ben's arrival. He took a seat beside her on the porch swing, his presence a comfort she had come to rely on. Train tickets for tomorrow morning, he said, showing her the papers. We should reach Sacramento by the day after tomorrow. Katherine nodded, a flutter of anxiety in her stomach at the thought of returning to the city she had fled. What will happen when we get there? You'll give your statement to a judge, not Edward Hargrove, but a neutral magistrate. The witnesses my friend found will corroborate your account of the judge's character and history, with the medical records and the evidence of your scars. Ben paused, his jaw tightening momentarily. It should be straightforward. The charge will be formally dismissed. And then you're truly free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. Katherine turned to look at him directly. What if I choose to come back to Yreka? The hope that kindled in Ben's eyes warmed her more than the last rays of the setting sun. I think Yreka would be mighty pleased to have its seamstress return, he said carefully. Especially a certain deputy. Katherine gathered her courage, the same courage that had helped her survive Judge Hargrove's attack and the months of running that followed. Ben, when you said you were falling in love with me, did you mean it? Every word, he replied without hesitation. Though falling isn't quite right anymore. I've landed squarely in love with you, Katherine Davis. She smiled, her hand finding his on the swing between them. Even with all my scars, all my broken pieces, Ben's fingers interlaced with hers. Especially with those. They're part of your story, a story of courage and survival that I admire more than I can say. He leaned closer. Besides, I have scars of my own, inside and out. We all do if we've lived any kind of life worth telling about. In that moment, with the light fading around them and the promise of a new beginning ahead, Katherine made a decision. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss, her first since before the attack, her first that wasn't tinged with fear or obligation. When they parted, Ben's expression was one of wonder and tenderness. What was that for? For seeing beauty where I thought there was only damage," Katherine whispered. "For teaching me that every scar tells a story of survival and that my story isn't over yet." The journey to Sacramento was both shorter and less harrowing than Katherine's flight from it months earlier. Seated beside Ben on the train, watching the landscape of Northern California roll past the window, she felt a strange sense of coming full circle. They stayed at a respectable hotel near the courthouse, in separate rooms as propriety demanded, though Ben made sure their rooms adjoined with a connecting door for safety. He insisted, though his slight smile suggested other considerations as well. The legal proceedings were indeed straightforward, as Ben had predicted. Katherine gave her statement to Judge Maxwell, a stern but fair-minded older man who listened attentively to her account of that terrible night in Judge Hargrove's kitchen. Two former housekeepers testified to similar experiences of unwanted advances and threats, though neither had endured the physical attack Katherine had. Judge Hargrove's personal physician reluctantly confirmed the late judge's episodes of uncontrolled anger following a head injury sustained in a riding accident years earlier. Most powerful was the testimony of Dr. Eleanor Whitman, one of the few female physicians in Sacramento who had treated Katherine immediately after her escape from the Hargrove house. Dr. Whitman provided detailed medical records of the extent and severity of Katherine's injuries, stating unequivocally that they were consistent with a violent attack and subsequent struggle for survival. Through it all, Ben sat in the courtroom, his steady presence giving Katherine strength when the memories threatened to overwhelm her. On the third day, Judge Maxwell delivered his ruling. In the matter of the death of William Hargrove, this court finds that Katherine Davis acted in justifiable self-defense against an unprovoked and potentially lethal attack. All charges are hereby dismissed, and Miss Davis's record shall reflect her complete exoneration. The relief was so profound that Katherine's knees nearly buckled as she left the courtroom. Ben's arm around her waist steadied her as they walked down the courthouse steps into the bright California sunshine. "It's over," she breathed, scarcely able to believe it. "Truly over." "You're free," Ben confirmed, his smile as bright as the day around them. "Free to return to Yreka with me if that's still what you want." Katherine looked up at him, this man who had risked everything to help her, who had seen beyond her scars to the woman beneath. "It is, but there's something I need to do first." That afternoon, they visited the cemetery where Katherine's parents were buried. It had been over a year since she had stood before their graves. Her father, a schoolteacher who had taught her to read and write and shoot. Her mother, a seamstress who had passed down the skills that now provided Katherine's livelihood. "I wish they could have met you," she told Ben as they placed flowers on the simple headstones. "My father would have appreciated your sense of justice. My mother would have loved your kindness." Ben squeezed her hand. "From what you've told me about them, I think I would have liked them very much." As they turned to leave, Katherine cast one last look at the graves. "Goodbye," she whispered, not just to her parents but to the life she had known in Sacramento, a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. The return journey to Yreka felt like a homecoming. As the train pulled into the small station, Katherine was surprised to see a crowd gathered on the platform. Mrs. Jenkins, Sheriff and Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Thompson the blacksmith, and dozens of other familiar faces from her months in town. "What's all this?" she asked Ben as they stepped off the train. "Word travels fast," he replied with a grin. "I might have telegraphed ahead with the good news." Mrs. Jenkins rushed forward to embrace her. "We knew you'd be cleared, dear. The whole town has been praying for your return." Katherine found herself surrounded by well-wishers. their genuine joy at her exoneration, and safe return overwhelming in its sincerity. These people, many of whom had seen her scars, all of whom had heard the charges against her, had chosen to believe in her innocence, to welcome her back with open arms. "Your shop's just as you left it," Mrs. Jenkins informed her as they walked toward town. "We kept it dusted and ready. Clara Bennett has her sister's wedding next month, and was beside herself thinking you might not be back in time to finish the alterations." The normalcy of it, the everyday concerns of a small town seamstress rather than a fugitive, brought tears to Catherine's eyes. That evening, the town held an impromptu celebration at the hotel restaurant. As Catherine moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about when her shop would reopen, she caught sight of Ben watching her from across the room, a look of such pride and love on his face that it stole her breath. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Ben escorted her back to the Jenkins house, where she would stay until finding more permanent accommodations. "Quite a welcome home," he remarked as they strolled through the quiet streets. "It doesn't seem real," Catherine admitted. "After everything that's happened, to just come back and pick up where I left off." "Not exactly where you left off," Ben corrected gently. "You're not the same woman who arrived in Yreka those months ago. You're stronger now, free of the past that was haunting you." They stopped outside the Jenkins's gate. In the silver moonlight, Catherine could see every line of Ben's face, the warmth in his eyes that had become her anchor. "And not alone anymore," she added softly. "No," he agreed, taking her hands in his. "Not alone. Catherine, I know it's soon and there's no rush, but I want you to know that whenever you're ready, I'm hoping to make that permanent." Her heart skipped a beat. "Benjamin Lawson, are you proposing?" "Not yet," he said with a smile. "But I'm giving you fair warning that I intend to, once you've had time to settle back in and be sure of what you want." Catherine felt a laugh bubble up inside her, a free, joyful sound that she hadn't known she was still capable of making. "I don't need time to know what I want, Ben. I've known since that night at the hotel restaurant when you told me my scars were beautiful because they told a story of survival." Ben's expression grew serious. "I meant every word. You're the bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, Katherine Davis." Under the star-filled sky, with the scents of pine and sage on the cool evening breeze, Catherine stood on tiptoe and kissed him a promise of the future they would build together. The following months brought a steady rhythm to Catherine's life, the kind of peaceful routine she had thought forever lost to her. Her seamstress business thrived, with orders coming not just from Yreka but from neighboring communities as word spread of her skill. Ben remained steadfast in his courtship, respecting Catherine's need to re-establish herself and find her footing as a free woman with a future ahead of her. They took evening walks, had Sunday dinners together, and gradually, Catherine found herself sharing more of her past with him, not just the trauma of Judge Hargrove's attack, but the happy memories of her childhood, the dreams she had once harbored, the woman she had been before fate intervened. In turn, Ben told her of his own past, his father's struggle with consumption that had brought them to the dry climate of Northern California from their home in Missouri. His years as a young deputy in Redding before coming to Yreka. The guilt he still carried over not being home the night his father finally succumbed to his illness. "We're quite a pair," Catherine observed one evening as they sat on the porch of the small house she had rented near the center of town. "Both carrying our share of scars. Makes us well matched," Ben replied, his arm around her shoulders. "We understand each other's broken places." As autumn painted the surrounding hills in golds and russets, Ben finally made good on his promise. On a crisp October afternoon, He took Katherine for a ride to his cabin in the foothills, the place that had briefly been her sanctuary, and the scene of her near capture by Grady. "I've been thinking," he said as they dismounted and walked toward the porch, "that this place needs some improvements if it's going to be suitable." "Suitable for what?" Katherine asked, though her quickening pulse suggested she knew the answer. Ben took her hands, his expression earnest. "For a home, our home, if you'll have me." From his pocket he withdrew a simple gold band set with a small, brilliant diamond. "Katherine Davis, I love you, your strength, your kindness, your courage, every scar, every laugh, every tear. Will you marry me and make this cabin our home?" Tears filled Katherine's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man holding it, this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and found beauty there, who had risked everything to protect her, who loved her not despite her scars but with them as part of her whole self. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Ben, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Katherine felt the last piece of her broken heart mend itself. The scars would always remain, both those visible on her skin and those hidden in her soul, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, a story that would continue, with new chapters yet to be written, with Benjamin Lawson by her side. Their wedding took place in early December, with snow dusting the surrounding mountains and pine boughs decorating the small church in Yreka. Katherine wore a dress of her own creation, ivory satin with a high collar of delicate lace that complemented rather than concealed the scars on her neck. It was a conscious choice, a statement that she no longer felt the need to hide. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, a testament to how thoroughly Katherine had been embraced by the community. As she and Ben danced beneath paper lanterns in the hotel's dining room, Sheriff Harrison approached with a telegram in hand. "This just arrived for you, Miss Davis. Forgive me, Mrs. Lawson," he corrected with a smile. Katherine opened the message, curious. It was from Sacramento, signed by Dr. Alina Whitman. "Thought you would want to know," she read aloud to Ben. Edward Hargrove resigned as district attorney following investigation into his brother's affairs. Evidence suggests he knew of prior incidents and covered them up. Justice, though delayed, is served. Wishing you every happiness in your new life." "A wedding gift of sorts," Ben observed, his arm tightening around her waist. "Closure." Katherine folded the telegram carefully. "Not closure," she corrected. "Just another chapter ending as a new one begins." That night, as they drove the short distance to the cabin that would be their home, snowflakes began to fall soft, silent, transforming the familiar landscape into something new and magical. Inside, Ben had prepared a surprise. The cabin had been expanded with a new room that would serve as Katherine's sewing studio, with large windows to capture the northern light and built-in cabinets for her supplies. "So you can continue your business from home," he explained as she explored the space in wonder. "I know how much your work means to you." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "It's perfect, Ben, thank you." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Katherine traced the outline of a scar on Ben's shoulder, a souvenir from a confrontation with a knife-wielding drunk years earlier. "I used to think my scars made me unlovable," she confessed softly. "That no one would ever see past them to the woman underneath." Ben's hand found hers, bringing it to his lips. "And I used to think loving someone meant risking too much, that the pain of loss would outweigh the joy of connection." "We were both wrong," Katherine murmured, resting her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Gloriously wrong," Ben agreed, pulling her closer. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the earth in a blanket of white, not erasing what lay beneath, but transforming it, making it part of a new landscape, a new beginning. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers that carpeted the hills around their cabin. Katherine's business continued to thrive, with customers willing to make the short journey from town for her services. Ben remained dedicated to his role as deputy, though Sheriff Harrison had begun hinting that retirement might be in his near future, with Ben as his likely successor. On a warm May afternoon, as Katherine worked in the small vegetable garden they had planted beside the cabin, she paused, one hand going to her abdomen as realization dawned. When Ben returned home that evening, she was waiting on the porch, her face alight with a secret joy. "You're home early," he remarked, kissing her before settling into the chair beside hers. "Everything all right?" "More than all right," Katherine replied, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "We're going to need another room on the cabin, Ben. By winter, there will be 3 of us living here." The wonder that spread across his face was something Katherine knew she would remember all her days. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Dr. Miller confirmed it this morning. We're having a child, Ben." Ben dropped to his knees before her chair, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his cheek against her middle. "A child," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." Katherine ran her fingers through his hair, marveling at how life could change so completely in the span of a few seasons from running for her life, certain she would never know love again, to this moment of perfect contentment. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted. "A husband who loves me, a home, a baby on the way. After everything that happened, it seemed impossible." Ben looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Nothing's impossible for a woman with your courage, Katherine Lawson. You fought for your life, for your freedom, for your right to be loved. And I'm the luckiest man alive to be the one who gets to love you." As the sun set behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Katherine and Ben sat together on their porch, hands intertwined, dreaming of the future they would build, a future where scars were badges of honor, where survival was celebrated, where love healed even the deepest wounds. In December of that year, as snow once again blanketed the hills around Yreka, Katherine gave birth to a healthy boy they named Thomas, after Ben's father. As she held her son for the first time, marveling at his perfect fingers and the tuft of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as his father's, Katherine felt the final piece of her healing fall into place. "He's beautiful," Ben whispered, sitting beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders as they gazed at their child. "He is," Katherine agreed, then smiled up at her husband. "And someday, when he's old enough to understand, we'll tell him our story, all of it, the dark parts and the light. We'll show him that even the deepest scars can fade with time and love." Ben pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll tell him that every scar tells a story of survival," he murmured, "and that surviving is only the beginning." As their son drifted to sleep in her arms, Katherine leaned her head against Ben's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the story she had once thought ended in that Sacramento kitchen had in fact only been beginning, a story of healing, of courage, of a love strong enough to see beyond scars to the beauty of survival. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering the earth with promises of renewal and the endless possibility of beginning again.